Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Knutsson and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 93, which goes down this weekend, headlined with a flyweight fight, 5 rounds, Alex Perez versus Tatsuro Taira. So Tatsuro Taira getting that real big step up in competition and we'll finally see exactly what he's about. Now, in regards to this card, we're back at the UFC Apex. I don't mind that. I've said it before. If we're at the Apex once a month, that's absolutely fine for me. I do think it comes with some real good angles on fights. Like you can hear the shots a little bit more. You can hear the corners. It's just a little bit more intense. It's just when it's at the Apex week in, week out, it does become a bit of a drag. But yeah, I'm happy for it to be back in the Apex. It's a small cage as well, which again, when it comes to breaking fights down, analysis, placing bets, you know, some fighters will have certain advantages and disadvantages in a smaller cage, again, stylistically against certain opponents. So again, it's always an interesting aspect. From a fight card perspective, I don't think it's the best card in regards to name value. However, you know, from a hardcore fan perspective, you look at the names on the card and there's some real interesting matchups. And I do think it's one of these events that, again, there's a lot of fights that are well matched. There's a lot of fighters that are on these sort of cards now that you're going to be seeing at the top of the division in a few years' time. So as of right now, from a casual fan perspective, the name value isn't that great on this card, but I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of really, really good, fun and competitive fights on the card with serious implications for some of these fighters as well. So it's a really intriguing card. It's a really intriguing fight night. I'm really looking forward to it, looking forward to breaking it down, and I'll be getting into that very, very shortly. But just before we do get into the breakdowns, as always, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then you can do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for everybody, no matter what type of gambler you are. We've got the handicapper betting advice, so from myself, which comes with recommended bets, written breakdowns, recommended unit stakes as well. We've got fun parlays, fun parlay options, so you can create your own parlays. And then, of course, we've got the official bet section as well, which states the exact bets and the unit size that I'm personally on myself, that I've got my cash on. And, of course, all the packages come with Base AI, which is our UFC prediction software, where you'll get a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every single fight on every single UFC event. That's all in one subscription. All you have to do is choose whether you just want one event, whether you want to pay monthly, or whether you want to jump on the annual subscription. So again, if you're wanting to jump into the action, have a little bit of fun, or start that long-term goal of beating the bookies over the long period, then make sure you go to MMAplay365.com. Now let's get started. The introductions out the way, the promos out the way. Let's get breaking down UFC Vegas 93. And as always, we start with the top of the card, the main event. We've got a 5-round flyweight main event between Alex Perez and Tatsuro Taira. Now it's a really interesting fight, especially from the perspective of Tatsuro Taira. He's 15-0. He's a major prospect. Look, you can see that Taira is a major prospect just with, you know, the level that he's fighting at in regards to the skill set. Like, he's effortless, he's grappling slick, he can get fights down to the mat, he's striking very, very good. We saw last time out, you know, we finally finished with a knockout opposed to, you know, taking his opponent down and just either controlling him topside for 3 rounds or finding a submission. So he found that knockout punch. So he's starting to put all the pieces of the jigsaw together. And like I say, sometimes you can see, even though the level of competition's not been very high, which I'm going to talk about very shortly, you can see the raw skills through that level of competition, if that makes sense, or at least I can, and you can see that there's a quality fighter there in Tatsuro Taira. However, one of the issues that I do have with Taira, surprisingly there is an issue because he does look like a good fighter, is, and I briefly mentioned it a moment ago, is the level of competition that he's been fighting in the UFC. So you go back and look at his 5 fights that he's had in the UFC. Yes, he's 5-0, 4 finishes from those 5 fights, but his opponents have been Carlos Candelario, CJ Vergara, Jesus Aguilar, Edgar Chairez, and Carlos Hernandez. So I don't think he's even fought like an intermediate type of fighter between this quality of opponent and a quality of opponent like Alex Perez, especially with the level of opponents Alex Perez has been fighting, which again we'll come on to. But what I'm trying to say is, A good example is Muhammad Mokaev. So before Muhammad Mokaev fought Alex Perez, he'd actually fought a Cody Durden, he'd actually fought a Charles Johnson, he'd actually fought a Tim Elliott. So even though Mokaev had fought the likes of Jafal Filio and Malcolm Gordon, he'd also fought, again, in my opinion, that slight step down from an Alex Perez before he got to Alex Perez, which Tatsuro Taira hasn't done. And not only that, but Mokaev fought that fight against Alex Perez over 3 rounds, whereas Taira, he's not only jumping up in competition like massively, but he's also jumping up into a 5-round fight as well. So there's a lot of question marks in my opinion on Taira. What is he going to be like stepping up in competition? Because yes, look, Taira's looked great against the opponents that he's fought, and like I said, you can see those raw skills through there. There's definitely a good fighter in Taira, 100%, but how good is Taira? And we're not going to know until he fights Alex Perez. Like, he could go in there against Alex Perez, absolutely slice through him, and we're like, holy shit, yep, he's done what he needed to do against that lower level competition in regards to just getting him out of there and making it look dominant and easy. But damn, he's done that against Alex Perez as well. So that's a possible scenario. Like I said, we're not going to know that though until he's actually fought that level against Alex Perez. Now, you look at Alex Perez in regards to where he's at as a fighter. I kind of feel he's turned that corner from all those cancelled fights. It wasn't his fault every time, but there was a few weight cuts that didn't go quite right, that he wasn't clear to fight, and there was a few injuries where he's pulled out. But now he seems to be firing. Like, he came in against Muhammad Mokaev off a long layoff, and I don't know if I'm the only person that thinks this in the world, right? But I've now watched this fight about 3 or 4 times due to taping other fights and other fighters. And every single time I'm looking at that fight thinking, man, that was like razor close. And on another night, Perez might have won that fight. But, the judges seemed quite unanimous, and it seemed from the fan base perspective that everybody thought that Muhammad Mokaev had got the job done as well. But Perez looked really good against Mokaev, who's one of the best wrestlers, most relentless wrestlers in the division. And then he had a quick turnaround against Matheus Nicolau. He won that fight, got the knockout. Now he's turning around quick again against a prospect. So I kind of think Perez has turned a little bit of a corner from the issues that he had a few years ago, and now he's making up for lost time. And in regards to the level that he's been fighting, like, you look at his last 5 fights compared to Taira's last 5 fights. Matheus Nicolau, Muhammad Mokaev, Alexandre Pantoja, Davison Figueiredo, Jussier Formiga. Like, Nicolau's a number 6 ranked UFC fighter. Muhammad Mokaev's a number 8 ranked UFC fighter. Alessandro Pantoja is the current flyweight champion. Davison Figueiredo, that was a championship fight. Davison Figueiredo, elite of the elite in that division. Jussier Formiga, even at the time he beat him, Jussier Formiga was ranked. So the level of opponent that Perez has been facing is just crazy. And yes, Perez is 2-3 in those 5 fights, but like I said, Muhammad Mokaev is one of the rising stars in the division. Real relentless wrestler, real good wrestler. Pantoja champion, Davison Figueiredo, the elite of the elite. So there's a big difference in what each fighter here has been facing. Now, stylistically, it gets a little bit interesting because, like I say, Taira's predominantly a grappler, likes to get the fights to the mat. He's not a bad wrestler, but he does have success getting fighters down. The thing is with Perez has got a wrestling background, and he is a very, very good wrestler, not only offensively, but especially defensively. Like, yes, Muhammad Mokaev got him down 3 times, but Perez was making Mokaev work so hard for those takedowns. And I kind of think that if he's making Taira work for these takedowns, is Taira going to start getting a little bit tired? Remember, this isn't 3 rounds, it's 5 rounds. So, there's question marks there. If Taira can't get this fight down to the mat and he's forced to stand, well, look, Taira's an okay striker as well, but so's Alex Perez. He's got a hard low kick. So's Taira, got a hard low kick. I think this is a really, really well-matched competitive fight, and it's going to answer a lot of questions. Now, when it comes to making a pick and a prediction, like, even if Taira gets Alex Perez down, Perez is a really good BJJ player too, so I don't see Taira having the same success on top of Perez like he has done against the Candelario, Vergara's and Carlos Hernandez's of the world. I just don't see it. I think it's going to be way more competitive than Taira's ever seen one of his fights before. And that's what makes it super intriguing. But like I said, when it comes to a pick and prediction, I am going to side with the fighter that I just know more about, that I just know has got the skill set and the quality to beat a lot of fighters in this division, and the fighter that's just simply seen the better level of competition. Like, in a fight like this, over 5 rounds, definitely experience does have to play a factor. It has to, because Perez has fought literally the best fighters in the world that he could possibly fight at his weight class, and Taira's yet to see that. So that's where I'm leaning for this fight, and for those reasons I'm picking Alex Perez to win this fight. In the next fight in the co-main event, we've got Ikram Aliskerov versus Antonio Trocoli. Now, Aliskerov, one of these fighters at the minute that not many fighters must be putting their hand up to fight, and I don't think in normal circumstances Trocoli might have been there either, but Trocoli's a bit of a weird one. Like, he won that fight on the Contender Series in 2019, but then he got popped for nandrolone by USADA, and I'm not a medic or a doctor, but I believe that nandrolone's one of the worst things for you to pop for, because it genuinely does enhance performance, as far as, like I say, as far as I'm aware. So it's a pretty bad one. But then he got brought back into the UFC, and then he's matched up against OSP. Trocoli withdrew from that fight. Then he's matched up against Omar Sy a few weeks ago. He pulled from that fight. So I kind of feel like he just fell into this Aliskerov fight, an opponent that he just can't say no to because of all the things that have happened prior to this fight. And I was going to say, look, it's a bit of a shame, because I actually think there's something really good about Antonio Trocoli's style, his frame, his height, the aggression that he fights with. He's well-rounded. But, in reality, this is what fighters do. You take fights, and this is, a big risk, but a big reward situation for Trocoli, because Trocoli doesn't want to come into the UFC 0-1. But at the same time, if he goes out there and beats Ikram Aliskerov and takes all that hype from Aliskerov, then damn, like, Trocoli just bumped himself all the way up the rank. Well, not the rankings, but all the way up the division, and will be heading towards some sort of ranking, I'm sure. So yeah, it's a big risk, big reward type of fight for Antonio Trocoli. But look, even though Trocoli's 6'5", he's a good striker, powerful striker. He's got some wrestling about him. He's got some grappling. Like I said, he's an interesting fighter. I believe he's training in Vegas, full time now as well, which is good. But Ikram Aliskerov's just a different beast. Aliskerov, we've seen his striking hangs, but his striking hangs well, so he can then close the distance, get his opponent tied up, get him down, and just ground and pound submissions. He's your typical Dagestani Russian. And even in the slight moments that we've seen in some of his fights where he's facing a bit of adversity and he's eating some shots, he's never really looked in too much trouble. He's never really made you think, okay, well, yeah, this guy's got some holes and this is how you're going to get at him. I just think he's a dominant fighter that does really well. And I also think that he could potentially be a champion at some point in the future. Like, it's going to be really interesting to see what Chimaev does in this division, because I believe it's going to take a style and a quality of fighter like Chimaev to be able to stop somebody like Aliskerov. But even saying that, like, that would be an amazing fight. So yeah, look, I'm digressing a little bit. I think Aliskerov is definitely one to watch for the future. He's a dark horse in the division. He's a potential future champion, in my opinion, with his skill set and the quality of fighter that he is. Antonio Trocoli, I think, is going to win plenty of fights in the UFC. Like I say, tall, long, good striker, good power, wrestling, grappling. He's got a lot to go with himself, but I do think this is a lot for him, especially on his UFC debut. I don't see Aliskerov slipping up here at all. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ikram Aliskerov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting one here between Lucas Almeida versus Timmy Cuamba. And I think it's a well-matched fight. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this fight plays out and where it goes, though, because, look, Lucas Almeida, I sound like a broken record with Almeida because I say this every single time. And I think I say it every single time because I kind of hope that when I'm researching a Lucas Almeida fight and I'm looking on Instagram that he's made the changes that I think that he should make, in my opinion. And this is not a knock on where he's training or anything. I don't really know too much about the gym, but it just seems like Almeida is fighting in Brazil at one of his local gyms. Maybe, he's a really loyal guy and he's staying loyal to his coaches and his teammates that got him to where he needs to be. But I do think that in this game, MMA, the world of MMA changes and flows so quickly, and I feel like fighters have got to keep evolving and keep the mind open to change to be able to get the best looks, to get the best training partners, to get the best level of training as well. And I'd love to see Lucas Almeida over at like an Extreme Couture, for example, because this guy is a good striker, but he doesn't seem to be evolving and developing in a speed that I think that he could do. Like, he's a good striker, but I can see so much area for improvement that I think he would be able to hit the heights of. And also his wrestling and his grappling as well. He's got real holes and flaws there. And this is, you know, it's part of the breakdown that I'm about to give with Timmy Cuamba, because Timmy Cuamba, in regards to his striking, it's okay. I definitely think that Almeida could potentially be a slightly better striker, but it's close, it'll be competitive. But with this fight, Timmy Cuamba, he's got some wrestling about him as well, so he can hit a takedown, he can do good work on top of his opponents, and I think that's going to be the difference maker in this fight. Because look, if Almeida even just, you know, worked heavily on his wrestling to be able to defend takedowns, or at least if he's taken down, be able to just get straight back up to his feet, you know, have that Taylor Lapillus about him. You know, I cashed on Taylor Lapillus last week, and I said that those two things will matter, the takedown defense and the get-up game, and that absolutely mattered. And I think Lucas Almeida, if he could develop at least like 50% of what Taylor Lapillus has got, it puts him in a better position in these types of fights. Because if Lucas Almeida keeps this fight standing, he's got every chance of beating Timmy Cuamba. But the problem is, even if Timmy Cuamba comes into this fight and tries to test the striking and decides that it's not working out for him, well, guess what? He can level change and get the fight down to the mat and have success there. However, if it wasn't working for Timmy Cuamba on the feet, and then he shoots takedowns and can't get takedowns, or does get the takedown and Almeida gets straight back up, well, guess what? Timmy Cuamba's going to start running out of ideas and Almeida can take over a fight. But I just don't see that happening, because I think that Cuamba is going to be able to get Almeida down if he wants him down, and is going to be able to keep him down for long enough periods to either just expend that energy a little bit of Almeida, you know, wear that gas tank down a little bit and just run the clock down and, you know, win the rounds over the course of the fight. So that's where I'm at. Like I say, I think it's a close and competitive fight on the feet, but I do think that Almeida might have the slight edge in regards to quality of striking and power as well. But Cuamba's got that second path to victory here, where he could just level change and get the fight down to the mat and start to look a little bit comfortable in doing that. So for those reasons, I'm picking Timmy Cuamba to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that I feel that the majority of the public are going to be really split on. Every single card, we seem to have that one fight that everybody is so split on, and this, I think, is going to be the one. We've got Miles Johns versus Douglas Silva de Andrade, and it's a really good fight. It's a really well-matched fight as well. The betting line's been all over the place. I think it opened a pick-em, and then money came in on Andrade, so Andrade went into the slight favourite, but it seems within the last 24 hours that money's then come back in on Johns, and now the line's starting to flip a little bit, but it's still a pick-em in some places. So, you know, the betting public definitely seem to be torn on this fight. And yeah, it's a real interesting one. Like, if you just look at the level of competition of both fighters, again, this is where we're going to start. I think level of competition is worth mentioning in this fight as well. And you look at Miles Johns, you look at the wins that he's had in the UFC. So Cole Smith, no longer in the UFC. Kevin Natividad, no longer with the UFC. Anderson Dos Santos, no longer with the UFC. Vince Morales, no longer with the UFC. And then, of course, Dan Argueta, which turned into a no contest as Miles Johns got a violation from USADA. I'm not sure what that was for. I think he said it was a tainted supplement, though. So look, you can take that what you want, but that's Miles Johnson's best looking performance against the best level of opponent that he fought against. So again, you know, you can take that suspension popping by USADA however you like. And then obviously Cody Gibson. Cody Gibson's not a bad fighter. He's still with the UFC, but again, not the highest level of competition. And then you flip over to Douglas Silva de Andrade's side. Like, this dude's been in the UFC for 10 years at this point. And yes, he lost his UFC debut against Zubaira Tukhugov, who, you know, has always been in and around, you know, a very difficult fighter to beat at the very least. But you look at the other fighters that Douglas Silva de Andrade is losing against: Rob Font, Petr Yan, Lerone Murphy, Said Nurmagomedov. But Douglas Silva de Andrade has also got wins against Cody Stamann, Sergey Morozov, Henan Barao, Marlon Vera. Also a win over Cody Gibson as well, from Cody Gibson's first stint in the UFC. So the level of competition, there's definitely a difference. However, when it comes to skill set and ability, the fight is relatively close somewhat. Like, look, Miles Johns is one of these fighters that I think overperforms in some spots, which is great, but then underperforms in other spots. But he has known to have cardio issues if he can't get his wrestling going, or if he does try to wrestle and he's met with a lot of resistance, that can also pose an issue on his cardio. Whereas Douglas Silva de Andrade on the other side, cardio's never really been an issue. He's got good forward pressure. He'll get in your face. He's got power. He's a little powerhouse. He's got good takedown defense. He's got a good get-up game if he is taken down as well. So instantly there, I'm seeing one issue for Miles Johns in regards to the fact that he is going to have to fight a little bit on the back foot. I think if he does shoot takedowns, he's going to be met with some resistance from Andrade. And I do think that this could potentially be a fight where Miles Johns does start slowing down more than what he would in another fight when he's not met with that type of resistance. However, on the flip side, the one issue that I think I'm going to have with Douglas Silva de Andrade is Miles Johns can get into this type of fight where he'll just close the distance, get a hold of you and pin you back against the cage, run the clock down, do just enough on the cage so the referee isn't separating and breaking you back out into open space. And then, like I say, just running the clock down and winning the rounds that way, you know, that ugly, dirty, gritty, grindy style of fighting. However, to flip on that again, like Douglas Silva de Andrade has got a massive experience edge here, fought the better level of competition. He's also quite physical and strong himself, so I'm not sure if that type of style and game plan of Miles Johns would work against Douglas Silva de Andrade. The one thing I will say is I don't like the age of Andrade being 38, but again, to counter that once more, like, he doesn't fight relatively like his age either. Like, he doesn't look old. He doesn't look like his durability's gone and he's slowing down. He still looks as good as what he did, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, in my opinion. He might even look better now than he did 4 or 5 years ago. So, look, it's a really interesting fight. I think that both fighters will be swinging for the bleachers. Both of them love to try and hit that home run bomb to try and knock their opponents out. But I kind of feel that Douglas Silva de Andrade just settles a little bit more, puts combinations together, finds different target areas. So in a close and competitive fight, when you're looking and to clutch straws and pick and choose the small moments that might matter in this fight, that might make that difference, I think the impact of the shots of Douglas Silva de Andrade, the pressure and the pace of him, putting Miles Johns on the back foot, with Johns having historically some cardio issues, I'm going to lean towards that fighter with the pace, pressure and the impact shots. So for those reasons, I'm picking Douglas Silva de Andrade to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between Asu Almabaev and Jose Johnson. Now, this is, in my opinion, an absolute horrific stylistic matchup for Johnson. Almabaev is a fighter that, you know, averages over 7 takedowns per 15 minutes. He hit 9 in his last fight, 2 in his fight before that. So he's hit 11 takedowns in his last 2 fights. Then you look over at Johnson. He's got a 36% takedown defense statistic. He was taken down 4 times by Chad Anheliger. He was taken down twice by Damon Blackshear, 6 times by Cartwright, 12 times by Ronnie Lawrence. And I've said this before with Johnson, it's a real shame that his takedown defense is as susceptible as what it is, because he is such a good striker. He's a dynamic striker, and he's actually a really good grappler as well. So even though he's taken down and put on his back, like against a certain level of opponent or a certain type and style of opponent, he'll hit sweeps, he'll hit reversals, and he'll get on top of his opponents. Or, you know, from his back, he'll throw up submissions. He's got really long legs, which I'm going to get into in a minute. And he'll lock up arm bars and triangles quicker than you can even blink. So, you know, from a grappling perspective, he's really good, but man, he just can't stop these takedowns. And someone like Asu Almabaev, who will definitely go for takedowns in this fight and will get takedowns in this fight. The thing is, Asu Almabaev's also a decent topside grappler, so I don't see Johnson being able to sweep and reverse as easy as what, you know, he has done in previous fights against other opponents, and I just really don't see Almabaev getting caught up in a triangle or an armbar either at this level in the UFC from full guard. So yeah, I think it's an horrific stylistic matchup for Johnson. However, the one advantage is that one of the advantages, that he is going to have here, like I said, the striking's really good. But also, Jose Johnson is 6 foot to Asu Almabaev 5'4", so there's an 8-inch height advantage. There's also a 6-inch reach advantage as well on the arms. I've got no idea what the leg reach will be, but I'm sure that'll be astronomical as well. So Johnson is going to be tall, he is going to be long. It is going to pose a little bit of a different approach from Almabaev in regards to the takedowns, because taking down someone that's that tall and long can be really difficult because the feet always tend to find the floor, to prevent the takedown. However, the one advantage that comes with being that tall is the hips are going to be lower for Almabaev to shoot at, so he's not going to have to level change too hard. But Almabaev's smart, and there are certain takedowns, where you can step to the side, lift the legs to the side and land in like side control or half guard. And it's going to be those takedowns that I think that Almabaev's going to have to hit just to get the legs out of the way to complete the takedown. And I'm sure Johnson's going to be a bit of a nightmare to start with when Almabaev's took him down. But I do think the longer the fight goes on, the more takedowns that Almabaev's going to hit. Even if he's only spending 10 to 15 seconds each time he takes Johnson down, if that happens like 10, 11, 12, 13 times across the 3 rounds of the fight, then Almabaev's just going to win out of control time. So I think it's a real tough fight for Johnson. He's got to land hard on Almabaev before Almabaev gets in on a takedown. And I think the more and more takedowns that come, the more hesitant Johnson will be to strike, the easier it becomes for Almabaev. So for those reasons, I'm picking Asu Almabaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between Adam Fugitt and Josh Quinlan. Now, this fight isn't really interesting, and I'll be honest with you, I don't really have a strong lean on or a read on this fight, if I'm being honest. It's hard to know where both fighters are actually at. Like, you look at Adam Fugitt, he's 1-2 in the UFC. The win was against Knutsson, which he was a big underdog against and looked phenomenal against. But then his 2 losses have come to Michael Morales and Mike Malott. Now, I know Malott sort of fell apart a little bit in his last fight, but he's a really skilled fighter, really well-rounded fighter. I still think quite highly of Mike Malott. And Michael Morales is a beast as well, and everybody seems to know that now. So those 2 losses, there's no shame in losing those fights, and you'd expect him to lose those fights, and you'd also expect Josh Quinlan to lose those fights if he fought those guys as well. And then, you flip onto Josh Quinlan's side, like, he's on a 2-fight losing streak. The Trey Waters fight doesn't look amazing, but Trey Waters is a tall, long fighter, and he's not bad. Like, he just had Quinlan's number on that night. Danny Barlow looks like he could potentially be a real interesting fighter to keep an eye on. Again, one of those fighters, like I just mentioned with Michael Morales, where, he comes into the UFC and opens everybody's eyes and then looks better and better each time we see him. Obviously, we've only seen Danny Barlow once, so yeah, he's an interesting fighter to keep an eye on. Again, I would also expect Adam Fugitt to have a tough fight with Waters, and I'd also expect him to lose against Danny Barlow as well. So both fighters are in a position where, they need to win, and it's really tough to know where they're at. Like, for me, I don't know. It's a really hard fight to predict. Like, on the feet, it's going to be close. I think if any fighter's wrestling and grappling, maybe it's Quinlan that tries to get the fight down to the mat, but I don't think he's going to get it down easy. And if he does get Fugitt down, I don't think Fugitt settles on his back either. So it's going to be a back and forth fight, competitive. I think we'll see a little bit of everything. And it's almost, when you come to making a pick and prediction for this fight, even though I'm not 100% sure, as I'm sure you're going to be able to tell through the tone of my voice, when it comes to making a pick and prediction, I'm going with 2 things. First one, which fighter I just think is a slightly better quality of fighter that will win more fights in the UFC, because that fighter will likely beat the opponent that won't match that. And then also my gut as well. And I'm leaning towards Josh Quinlan. I think Quinlan is the slightly better fighter in regards to his ceiling and winning more fights in the UFC. And I think if he starts putting things together quite well, I think he can, do well in regards to just mixing things up, changing the course of the fight, breaking the flow of Fugitt, that type of performance. So yeah, it's I know it might seem like a half-hearted prediction, but it's one of these fights I'm just really not sure on, and I'm not going to sit here trying to sound confident about a fight and picking a fighter and predicting a fighter to win that I'm just not. I'm not going to do that. So yeah, tough fight, competitive. I'm going to be siding with Josh Quinlan to win the fight. And in the next fight, I think this might be, aside from the main event, I think this might be the best fight on the entire card. We've got Tagir Ulanbekov versus Joshua Van. Now, with Ulanbekov, he's a fighter that I bet on and won, I bet against and lost. I did bet Cody Durden last time out. I thought that Durden would give him way more issues with the wrestling and grappling. Durden was on like some crazy win streak, and he was an underdog every single time. I'd also cashed him a couple of times as an underdog in that win streak as well. So with Durden, I went back to that well against Ulanbekov just because I thought that he would cause Ulanbekov Ulanbekov some issues. And it turns out he just didn't. Like, Ulanbekov seems to be levelling up each time. Striking seems to be getting a little bit better. He seems to be getting a lot more controlled. Like, because for as good as and dominant as he is, he still had some holes where fighters could potentially get at him at. But he seems to be fixing these holes and putting things together really well. And with the level of wrestling and grappling that he showed against Cody Durden, to stop that relentless pace and pressure that Durden puts on every single opponent that he fights, I think it's super impressive, and it's a type of dominant style that is going to cause a lot of opponents issues. Now, on the other side, we've got Joshua Van. Joshua Van is a fighter that I like a lot. I did bet against him against Kevin Borjas, and that didn't quite work out. You know, I got a really, really good line on Borjas, though, so it wasn't like I was super high on Van to lose the fight. It's just, you know, I was making what I believe was a good value bet. And there was value to be had, like Joshua Van got dropped in that first round by Borjas, who was hurt. So, yeah, in regards to Van, look, Van's definitely a prospect. He's got a super high ceiling. He's going to be up there at the division. He's still only like early 20s, like maybe 22 years old, something like that, 23. Might even be 21. I don't know. He's very, very early 20s. But he's going to be up there at some point in the future. Like, he's still like 5 years off his prime, which is scary to look at where he's currently at on his skill set. And he's a type of fighter that's going to cause a lot of opponents a lot of problems. Like, he's a very quick fighter, in and out of range effortlessly, slides into range, lands combinations, slides back out of range, real good hand speed, will mix in kicks as well. Against a certain opponent, he's got wrestling, he's got grappling. I don't think he's going to have that here. So, again, that's going to be one of his issues, the fact that he's going to have a level of his game taken away from him, because I don't think that he's going to be successful in, you know, that wrestling and grappling style against Ulanbekov, who is a very strong wrestler and grappler. I think Cody Durden's a better wrestler and grappler than Joshua Van, and Ulanbekov completely stuffed and nullified that. So I expect him to do the same against Van. Where Van's going to get at Ulanbekov is within the striking. However, when it gets too much with the striking, I think Ulanbekov's got that path to victory in regards to the wrestling and grappling, where he will be able to get Joshua Van down. Maybe it might be hard initially. Maybe Van stands back up a couple of times initially as well, but Ulanbekov can and will keep on going back to that relentless wrestling and grappling type of style, and I think that's what's going to get at Joshua Van. I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash on the feet, so I think Ulanbekov's going to be somewhat competitive with Joshua Van. However, if this was a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I'd favour Van to win, but like, all I'm saying is the biggest gap in skill here is with that wrestling and grappling, because I think the striking of Ulanbekov is better than the wrestling and grappling of Van, and that's what then starts allowing you to see a stylistic path and advantage for Ulanbekov in this specific fight. So I think it's a great fight. Like I said, outside of the main event, probably the best fight on the entire card, but I am going to side with the Russian, so I'm picking Tagir Ulanbekov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nate Maness versus Jimmy Flick. Now, I spoke earlier about Almabaev and Jose Johnson being a very bad stylistic matchup. I think this is a bad stylistic matchup as well. A bad stylistic matchup for Jimmy Flick. Nate Maness, I don't think is, you know, a world beater at this level in the UFC, but, you know, when you look at how this fight plays out or where this fight can play out, you look at the striking. Nate Maness, I think, is a better striker than Jimmy Flick. He's more polished, he's more technical. I think he's got better output. I think he's going to have better cardio if the fight does go long as well. And the power that Maness hits, I just don't think Jimmy Flick's going to be able to take too many of those shots. And I think if this fight is, the majority of the fight is played out on the feet, I think Nate Maness hits Jimmy Flick with some hard shots and eventually knocks him out, or just beats him up so badly that he dominates a decision. However, with Jimmy Flick's style is definitely within the wrestling and the grappling, but Nate Maness isn't an easy fighter to take down. He's got a wrestling background himself. Now, if you do take him down, he can have moments where he's hit and miss. In some fights, he can get right back up to his feet, but in other fights, he can sort of accept position. But I think that with Maness's wrestling defense and the striking that he's going to be landing on Flick, I think it's going to be very difficult for Flick to find the right entries into the takedowns, because I do believe that the entries are going to have to be spot on here if Jimmy Flick's going to get Maness down. And if they're not spot on, I think Maness will defend, and that's where I think the issue is going to be. I think Maness will be landing nice shots on Flick. those takedowns might start becoming a little bit desperate, shooting from a little bit too far out. Then Flick starts tiring because the fight's not going his way and is expending a lot of energy trying to get the fight down to where he wants it to be. And then, like I said, even if he does get the fight down, Maness might just get straight back up to his feet, which then starts demoralising the opponent. And yeah, I think it's like I said, it's a bad stylistic matchup. I think Nate Maness has got this fight covered, I think, wherever the fight goes. So for those reasons, I'm picking Nate Maness to win this fight. And talking of stylistic matchups, this one's interesting as well, and I do think there's a bad stylistic matchup here as well. We've got Garrett Armfield versus Brady Hiestand. Now, Brady Hiestand's a fighter that I actually really like. I think he's got, you know, a solid wrestling game, a solid grappling game. He can be a little bit flaky in times, but all in all, he's got a decent skill set for him to win fights in the UFC. I bet him as an underdog last time out. And yeah, I was a little bit fortunate to cash that. I thought he'd done better than what the judges thought he'd done in those first 2 rounds. And the finish was then a little bit soft as well. So yeah, I did feel a little bit fortunate last time out with Brady Hiestand, which is very rare that I say that, because I'm normally on the other side of getting screwed. But yeah, Brady Hiestand is a fighter that I do like. However, stylistically against Garrett Armfield, I'm just not sure Hiestand's going to be able to get much going in this fight. Like, Garrett Armfield is a fighter that's got real good wrestling, defensively really good as well. He's got a really good grappling game. So even if Hiestand gets on top of Armfield, even though Hiestand's got a good grappling game, he still leaves some holes, some gaps for opponents to exploit, sweep, reverse, or stand up. And I think Armfield's going to be able to find those holes. Like, Armfield's a really well-rounded fighter, and he's going to be a very difficult fighter to beat. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be a ranked fighter in the future, top 10, top 15 or anything, but what I'm saying is at this level in the UFC, he's very, very solid. And I think with Hiestand, who can make some errors, some mistakes, unforced errors, that type of thing, I think Armfield's going to be able to capitalise on all that kind of stuff. Then when you look at the striking, I think Armfield's levels above where Hiestand's at with the striking. I think Armfield's going to be able to really put it on Hiestand, force Hiestand to start shooting takedowns that Armfield is seeing coming. Armfield can defend, snap down, either stand back up or take the back from the sprawl. I think it's a really good fight for Garrett Armfield here. And although I don't think it's going to be a whitewash, Hiestand will have his moments. I just don't think those moments are going to be enough. I think they'll be few and far between, and I don't see Hiestand finishing Armfield in any way, shape or form unless, you know, that one clean punch lands on the button and everyone's got that puncher's chance in the UFC or in MMA with 4-ounce gloves. But outside of that, I don't see Hiestand finishing Garrett Armfield, and therefore, if Hiestand's going to win, it's going to be by decision, and I just don't think he takes 2 out of the 3 rounds here. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Garrett Armfield to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Carli Judice making a UFC debut against Gabriella Fernandes. Now, just like I said with Jose Johnson earlier on, Gabriella Fernandes is a good striker, a very good striker, but got so many holes in her wrestling and grappling. And the UFC have finally matched Fernandes up in a fight where she's not necessarily going to be faced with a very good wrestler or grappler, or that might be unfair to say, or a fighter that is going to be relentless with wrestling and looking to get the grappling going is what is probably fairer to say. Because Carli Judice is a striker herself, and then when you look at the striking differences between both ladies, Fernandes is just a higher level of striker, much better level of striker, more power, more aggressive, more pressure, and I think Judice is in for a really rough night. However, if Judice is smart and they've watched the tape and they've hit a wrestling heavy fight camp where the wrestling is going to be within the game plan, then maybe she gives herself half a chance of fighting. But I've not seen enough from that wrestling and grappling from Judice to be sure that, like, look, yeah, she's going to go in there, she can take Fernandes down and she can hold her down. The types of fighters that Fernandes is losing against are predominant wrestlers and grapplers, and Carli Judice is just not that. So I don't think Carli Judice is then the better striker, and I just then think it's a very difficult fight for Judice. Stylistically, the UFC have done Gabriella Fernandes a favour here by finally just laying off that wrestler and grappler, giving Fernandes time or a fight to really showcase her skills and look good, and I think that's exactly what happened. So for those reasons, I'm picking Gabriella Fernandes to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jeka Saragih versus Westin Wilson. Now, I'm going to try my best to break this fight down without, there's definitely no disrespect from my side. Look, I'm not that type of person where I'm going to sit here and rip a fighter to shreds, because the bottom line is, if I was in the cage with that fighter, they would absolutely rip me to shreds. So, look, Westin Wilson is just not a UFC caliber fighter. I don't think that he's going to win a fight in the UFC. I think that if he loses this fight, which, you know, spoiler alert, I'm anticipating him to, I'm not sure if he gets that fourth shot. Look, I hope he does, because he's, you know, he stepped in for the UFC when they needed him, and he stepped in against Silva, a fight that probably not many fighters are holding their hand up to fight against. Now he's fighting Jeka Saragih, who, again, it's not the best stylistic matchup for him, but he just keeps on saying yes. He's not causing, or at least I don't think he's causing the UFC any headaches or issues with the matchmaking. So I hope they do give him that fourth fight if he does lose here. But yeah, he's not a fighter that I think is going to stick around in the UFC past his first contract. And the thing is with Wilson, like, he's not a terrible fighter stylistically, because he's got a good grappling game, and that could work in fights. But the problem that Wilson's got is his striking defense. Like, even his striking offensively isn't terrible, but the problem with Wilson is you can just get it in from his defense. His hands go low, he allows himself to be backed up, he can't, or he struggles to use his range effectively inside the cage, and he allows fighters to get inside of his boxing range and just absolutely piece him up and rip him apart. Because when these smaller fighters, which Jeka Saragih is going to have a height and reach disadvantage, but when he gets into that boxing range, he's then got the advantage, because the shorter fighter is then going to rip to the body, rip to the head, and the fighter with the longer arms, you know, you can't get your straight punches going because the range isn't quite right. So now you're looking for maybe looping hooks, but then looping hooks leave your chin wide open, and it's just then really, really difficult. And that's how I see this fight going. Jeka Saragih is a little ball of energy. Like, he's going to come forwards. He might have to eat a couple of shots to close the distance, and I think that's what will happen. But when he gets in to close the distance, he's just going to absolutely rip powerful combinations at Wilson, body and head. And I think the combinations are going to leave openings, and eventually Saragih is going to find that kill shot and knock Wilson out. I just think it's really tough. And look, if Wilson tries to get a hold of Saragih and trips him down to the mat, maybe there's a path for him there. But again, on top, Wilson seems to be more submission over position, so he'll try and transition and improve his position without solidifying the current position, therefore leaving some holes and gaps to escape, which I think Jeka Saragih will be able to hit. So I think the striking defense of Wilson's the real issue. And here against Saragih, who's very forward pressure, very in your face, will swing big bombs and combinations in that boxing range, I think stylistically it causes a problem for Wilson. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jeka Saragih to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this fight's tried to be scheduled a couple of times. We've got Julia Polastri versus Josefine Knutsson. I think we're going with. I would say Knutsson, but we're going with Knutsson. I'm pretty sure that's what the UFC broadcast have gone with, and I'm also pretty sure that they checked with the fighter how to pronounce the name. So yeah, we'll go with Knutsson. But yo, Knutsson has proven to look actually pretty decent, and she's got some good striking, she's got some good pressure, she's really good in the clinch, she's shown that she's got a level of wrestling and grappling as well. So she's looking like she could be a really interesting fighter to keep an eye on, because she's well-rounded, she's very aggressive, and she's well-rounded in the sense of she's good defensively where she needs to be. And that's always key to every fighter that you're looking at with a potential high ceiling, because a lot of fighters can be good offensively, but then when they're not good defensively, that's where they're eventually found out against a better level of competition once they start getting up there and fighting that better level of competition. But Knutsson seems to be decent with the defense as well. So look, Julia Polastri, she is a fighter that is predominantly a striker, but we have seen her mix in some wrestling and grappling. But I just kind of feel that Knutsson here is going to be slightly better in every single area, both offensively and defensively. It's one of those fights where I see Knutsson being the better striker, I see her being the better wrestler, and I see her being the better grappler offensively. Then defensively, do I see Polastri taking Knutsson down? No, but I can never say never. So if she does take her down, do I see her laying on top of her for long periods? Well, no, I think Knutsson would get back up to her feet. And then on the feet, do I see Polastri out striking Knutsson, finding holes in her defence? No, I don't see that either. So it's one of them where I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash, but I do think it's going to be a comfortable fight for Knutsson when all's said and done. Like, even if it goes to a decision, I could see maybe 2 absolute definite rounds for Knutsson, and then maybe it was 1 50-50 round with a slight edge to Knutsson that maybe a judge or 2 scores the other way, so it's 29-28, but I don't see Polastri taking 2 rounds, and then if there's a finish, I think Knutsson's got the finishing upside here as well. So, yeah, I think it's a tough fight for Polastri. Like I said, will be competitive in moments, won't be a whitewash, but one that I absolutely expect Knutsson to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Josefine Knutsson to win this fight. And the final fight to break down, which means it's the first fight on the night, and I feel like the UFC do this on purpose to get people to tune in early, because a lot of these fight cards have got a real fun fight as the first fight of the night, where you're thinking, well, this fight could easily be up in the top end of the prelims. But look, here we've got Shayilan Nuerdenbeker versus Melchizedek Costa. And like I said, it's a fun fight. It's going to be super competitive. You've got Melk Costa. I'm not going to say his full name. It'll drive me nuts throughout this. So we'll call him Melk Costa. We've got Melk Costa, who is predominantly a striker with some wrestling and grappling to go with it. And then on the other side, we've got Nuerdenbeker, who's predominantly a wrestler with grappling that has got some striking to go with it. So it's stylistically, it's a really interesting fight. I can see it being back and forth. I can see both fighters having the moments. From Costa's side, Costa can really look like he's a good technical striker, straight shots. He can be calm and patient, but be effective at the same time. The thing is, striking with Nuerdenbeker's a ball of energy. He'll close the distance. He's got power in both hands. He can knock you out, knock you down. And again, it's one of those where he could be losing a round, but then find a big left hook or a big straight right hand, drop the opponent, and then suddenly steal the round off him. He's that type of fighter, so you've always got to be very aware, mind your P's and Q's type of fight when you're fighting somebody like Nuerdenbeker. Both of these fighters, they've got a mutual loss with Steve Garcia, a fight where both of them were winning round 1 but then got finished in round 2. If you're clutching at straws, I'd say Nuerdenbeker had the better performance against Steve Garcia. But all in all, like I say, it's a closely well-matched fight. I do like that win, though, that Nuerdenbeker had against TJ Brown, and I'm a little bit annoyed at myself because I had that as a potential recommended bet because Nuerdenbeker was an underdog there, and I didn't quite pull the trigger on Nuerdenbeker, and it was one of those fights where he was a very, very good underdog to have because it looked relatively, although it was competitive, it was a clear decision win for Nuerdenbeker. He did really well. He reversed positions when he was on his back, but he hit plenty of takedowns. He was landing hard punches, and TJ Brown's no slouch. Like, he's a good fighter everywhere. So I kind of feel that the TJ Brown win for Nuerdenbeker was a really, really good win for him. And here, he's an underdog against Costa. So in a fight that's like, I think is very well matched, going to be fun, exciting, back and forth, trading moments. So Costa will have his moments, then Nuerdenbeker will have his moments, then Costa will have moments again. In that type of fight, I see it as a potential 50-50 fight. So from a pick and prediction perspective, I'm just going to side with the fighter that I think, well, the fighter that's the underdog, because that's likely where the value is going to be from a betting perspective. So for those reasons, I'm picking Shayilan Nuerdenbeker to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Once again, as always, thank you for everybody that tunes in, whether you're listening on YouTube or whether you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you're listening, thank you very much. Remember, on YouTube, there is a comment section, so that is a place for you to come on. Let's talk fights. It's me that comes onto the replies onto YouTube. I'll always try my best every single week to get back to people, so tell me where we agree, where we disagree, who you've got a bet on. If you are betting this event, then I hope you cash, unless you're betting against one of the fighters I'm betting on, then of course I hope that you don't win. But look, like I say, thank you for tuning in. If you are wanting to jump into the action once again, then make sure you hit up MMAplay365.com. We've got everything in there for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler, whether you just bet for fun. We've got small stakes, big stakes, all that fun stuff. So we've got plenty there, including Bayes AI, which is our very own UFC prediction software built on Bayesian algorithms that give a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every single fight on the card. So again, that's all in one place at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next week.